Welcome back. Today we do a quick one on EPZ's latest. This is the Q5 Pro. This is the TP35 dongle, or portable digital audio decoding cable, as how they call it. So this is the Q5 Pro. Of course, this is the Q5 was a very popular set a little while back. A single dynamic driver. It actually was quite popular. A lot of people like the Q5. So not that much of a surprise that they were going to do a Q5 Pro with an upgraded dynamic driver. Slightly tweak the tuning based on some of the feedback on Q5, and you end up with the Q5 Pro. So one thing to notice, the shell did change a little bit, and I would say what's most noticeable about the shell, other than the oval shape, is it's actually quite small. So those of you who are with smaller ears and trying to decide whether to get kind of a middle of the road Warner or cadenza, something that you want something a little bit more comfortable and a lot smaller, I think this one is one that you would probably want to look at. Not that far off in tuning, but the shell wise might be a little bit more comfortable for your ears if you were trying to get your first or second IEM. So EPZ is also really good at cables. So this is a nice white cable, nice 2-core white cable with the copper, goldish copper accents. Again, kind of not all that different from some of the other cables that you might see, but again, it's a really nice matching set. The accents on the shell, the accents on the cable, all this is a really nice package, and I think EPZ is actually quite good at those things. TP35 takes on kind of design cues from one that we've seen. I think quite a few dongles this year have actually done the window style, and this one kind of does it as well. So typically there's an LED, and there's an LED kind of right in there too. You get volume buttons on the side. You do get a 4.4 and a 3.5 and USB on this side. So, I think this one is probably their more valued dongle, as opposed to some of their higher end dongles that they actually released earlier in the year. This one, I think, is supposed to be a slight upgrade over the Q5. But again, we'll kind of start this off, and I will say that we are at the end of the year, and we've had a year full of a lot of single dynamic drivers. We've had quite a few CS43198 dongles, and to get to the end of the year and introduce something new, it either has to stand out and do something different, but generally we're kind of looking at sets that are filling market positions, hitting price points, slight upgrades. This is sort of filling a price point, but if you've purchased other single dynamic drivers earlier in the year, you've purchased other dongles earlier in the year, these are not going to be radically different or better than what you've already purchased. These are sort of, I would call them both middle of the pack or even value sets. It's kind of EPZ introducing products at price points and hitting targets that they wanted to hit, as opposed to looking at, this is the new single dynamic driver king, or this is the new CS, dual CS 43198 dongle king. I don't think that's how they were positioned. These were kind of positioned more along the lines of introducing products in their portfolio that hit price points or added some capability. In the case of Q5 Pro, new dynamic driver, new cable. I think there was probably something there that they wanted to do that was new. But generally, again, we've had a lot of single dynamic drivers. The end of the year, I always tend to say, just wait until the beginning of the year when the newer models will come out. We may have newer single dynamic or newer drivers that come out that add a little bit more performance to it. But these are, if you've already purchased a lot of single dynamic drivers, you probably don't really need one. This one is going to offer something specific on the style or the packaging or something else that you may want. But I wouldn't say it's radically different than Q5. It's just kind of a retweaked version of it. But we'll start with TP35, and spec-wise, again, it's a CS43198 dual because it's balanced. It does do 65 milliwatts on single-ended, 150 milliwatts on balanced. It does have independent volume buttons, which you don't see all that often, so you can actually change the volume locally without changing the volume on your phone. Some people are really into that. This one does have high-low gain if you push in both buttons and hold them. It also does have some of the DAC filter modes. And I will say exactly this, kind of what I was just talking about. Ultimately, the problem with most of these 43198 dongles, especially at this price point, as a TP35, they all tend to emphasize the vocals. They all tend to be quite similar. The ones that are quite a bit more expensive, I think, tend to be a little bit different, but the ones that are mid-pack, kind of right around this price point, I think they all tend to sound very, very similar to me. They tend to emphasize the vocals at the expense of a treble extension. There's just a slight emphasis kind of down here as opposed to maybe an ESS, which kind of brings it out here, and you get more of a sense of extension on the treble. These tend to, you could add a little bit of warmth down here. Some dongles do that. Some of them have this emphasis here, and you get a really sweet sound, right? A little bit of warmth with some nice clear vocals. Those two combine into a very pleasing sound. It's very gentle, appealing, but it's not exactly, I wouldn't call that transparent. It's still very quite colored. It still has a very CS 4319 style sound. It's a little bit different than we're going to get on their TP30, which is their ESS version. So that's why I said, if you're a balance junkie and you like to hear end-to-end balance and extension, I think the TP30 with its ESS chip is going to be better balanced, better extension. When I A/B those two, I will still prefer the TP30. I think the TP30 was actually a really, really nice dongle. It's the gold brick one, and I would prefer that one over the TP35. But for those of you who do prefer that kind of vocal emphasis, who do like a dongle that's slightly warmer, kind of this balance of the two, I think that is a very pleasing sound. And there's certainly tons of people who prefer that sound, and you'll probably prefer the TP35 over the TP30 for that simple reason. So let's talk about the Q5 Pro. So they call it a second-gen carbon ceramic composite dynamic driver. They did tweak the tuning. And is it the Pro version, right? Is this one the better version of the Q5? And for me, I would say I do prefer the balance on the Pro more than the original P5. I think the Q5, I mean. The original Q5, and again, this one actually has the same peak. It's just less noticeable. And I think a lot of these peaks on the Q5 Pro tend to be less noticeable than they were on the Q5. And I don't know if that's the shell, the driver. I don't think the graph really captured the difference between the two all that well. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the graph. I will say, just listening to the Q5 Pro, I thought it was more pleasant, more balanced, more appealing to me. I would call it the Pro version because I like it more than the original Q5. But I do know that a lot of people like the original Q5. And if you like the Q5, you probably should stick with the Q5. And I wouldn't say the Pro is going to be an upgrade for you, because you probably like the tuning on the 5 a little bit more than the Pro. So if you look at their marketing, it says the Q5 Pro is balanced, magnificent, neutral, and natural. And as I said, I do like the balance better on the Q5 Pro. It does sound a little bit slightly more neutral to me, and it does sound a little bit more natural from the Q5. And again, that was, a lot of it was on the Q5 were these peaks, and I think they were more noticeable to me. There was sort of this brightness to it and this peakiness to it that I didn't really care for. I know that wasn't the case for everyone, but for me in particular it was, and that sort of goes away on the Q5 Pro. So yeah, I do sort of agree with their marketing on this one. I think this one is kind of a better version of the Q5, and I would call it more of a safe vocal set. It's not really a bass or treble set. It has pleasant, clear vocals, and I think it did that quite well. And as I said, the graphs don't quite capture the balance or difference from Q5. They look very, very similar. So yeah, again, I'm not going to talk too much about the graphs, but I don't think it necessarily captured everything that is different about Q5 to Q5 Pro. So the bass, again, this isn't really a bass-led set. The dynamic driver is good. It's the second generation. They've sort of improved something on it. It does sound a bit tighter, and again, that makes the vocal sound a bit better. Right in the middle of that leaner single dynamic drivers to thicker single dynamic drivers. So again, if you've purchased other single dynamic drivers during the year, you may have purchased a leaner one, maybe like a 7Hz Zero. Maybe you have a thicker one, maybe like a KZ EDC Pro, or maybe a Cadenza. I think EPZ sort of kind of thread the needle on tuning between those two. So not quite, it's kind of thinner than the thicker ones and thicker than the thinner ones. It's kind of right in the middle. And again, the middle tends to be a very appealing place to be. I think it's a nice, safe tuning. The mids, again, if you are on a set like if you're on a dongle like TP35, I do think the vocals, I think it's a vocal set, and to have them a little bit emphasized on the TP35, it's a little bit too emphasized for me on the TP35. But when you listen to it on TP30, you get the better balance, and it sounds closer to the marketing, this more neutral, more natural. I think TP30 actually brings that out a little bit more than TP35. But again, the graph is a bit off. The mids are nicely clean, a little bit safe, general appealing for female vocals. I think they hit the target market with the tuning. This tuning isn't all that far from lots of other sets, and again, I think they all tend to be generally appealing for those female vocals. And the treble, again, not as peaky as it appears. It is still boosted and lifted later. Again, both these sets kind of had this later treble lifted, and it's not shouty. It's not like they're poking this up the ear gain area. It's this later treble lift, and that tends to sound a little bit thinner, but it can also sound a little bit ethereal or airy. And I would say that's what really comes across on Q5 Pro versus Q5. Q5 sounded a little bit peaky, like it actually sounded closer to the graph. This sounds a little bit more lifted, and you do get this airiness to it, and maybe it's an etherealness to it. But yeah, that upper treble sounds, just a little bit more atmospheric. And I thought it was a pretty cool sound. It's kind of an engaging sound, and it was different than Q5. So yeah, again, I think I liked Q5 Pro just a little bit better, just for some of these small reasons that are just slight tweaks on what they did originally. But yeah, so that is what I got on the Q5 Pro. On the TP35, if you happen to have not purchased any sets during the year and you're looking to pick up a single dynamic driver, looking to pick up a kind of mid-pack, something that resembles lots of other dongles, but perhaps comes in at a better price because EPZ decided to put it on sale, I think TP35 is a pretty nice one to pick up as well. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.